Today I'll be reviewing the Misfits Gaming against Fnatic draft. This draft is, in my opinion, very interesting because it ends up being a draft where Misfits commits to a certain type of playstyle very early into the draft. They get punished very heavily by it. They end up getting destroyed by a single champion, which we'll see later on. So it's very interesting how Fnatic reacts to it and how Misfits put so many resources into something that can get destroyed by a single champion. So the Kartus ban is very interesting in my opinion. It doesn't really make a lot of sense this early on into the draft unless you're planning to pick Gragas, and I believe that's why Fnatic banned Gragas out of Ryzark. Another thing is that Echo Jungle completely destroys Karthus in a solo queue environment, and I believe in competitive it also do that early on if you have a priority in laning phase, so it's interesting that they're banning it out this early on when Razork is a known Echo player. The Cinder ban, it's normal, champion is very good right now. Senna ban, it's expected, especially with the rising popularity of fasting Senna. And now the Yarn ban is very weird in my opinion. They're basically making it so Fnatic doesn't have to choose between giving up either Ornn or Aphelios, and they're letting Fnatic either ban Aphelios or just ban something else and they take Aphelios, which is what Fnatic ends up doing. But for some reason Misfits goes for Pantheon, which it's really weird. Pantheon doesn't really have that big of a priority. It could be easily pickable on blue 2 and blue 3, so I'm not sure why they first pick him when Aphelios is open. It's really weird. Fnatic ends up answering with GP and Aphelios, and here starts the first issue at the draft. After the Pantheon, they decide to go into Xayah Rakan, which when you see these three champions, you know that the enemy team wants to go into you, and they're already drafting these two into GP, which has a good time playing into people that want to get in his face. So I'm not really sure why they're doing it. It's really weird, and Misfits ends up paying the price. Fnatic third picks the Tamkench, which is really good into this kind of champions, and makes it so Aphelios has no trouble going through laning phase. Are we going to bans? Talia ban, Jarvan ban. Not really sure why it's being done. Doesn't make a lot of sense. Lee Sin ban again doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's fine. And Fnatic goes for Rek'Sai. Personally, I'm not sure if Fnatic thinks it's Pantheon jungle because the matchup is fine, but there's not a lot of reason to go for Rek'Sai. One thing in favor of the Rek'Sai in this situation is that a lot of the junglers are banned in this draft, so maybe they just want some comfort. Their team is already outscaling with GP Aphelios, and they have a lot of their team fight is really easy to be played into these three champions so far. So maybe Rek'Sai is just there to give them some early game power and then make it easier to play team fights during mid game where he's knocking up the Pantheon, or maybe depending on the other champions that are coming up, maybe those. Misfits goes for the Azir. Now the Azir pick here is really weird. I already said Misfits comp these three champions. They want to go in. They don't want to play back and play it safe. So the Azir pick is completely against his own comp. He just wants to stay back and peel, which is really weird because Fnatic's comp doesn't really want to get into your face. I think something like Orianna would make a lot of sense. Something like even Cho'Gath would make a lot of sense in this situation. You're playing against three champions with low mobility as GP, Aphelios, and Tamkench, and to some extent Rek'Sai doesn't have a lot of mobility either outside of the tunnels. So Cho'Gath with Glacial Augment would completely destroy this team. So yeah, it's really weird that they went for the Azir. Doesn't make a lot of sense in this situation. They go for the Set. Now Set has a good matchup into GP. He can just regen all of GP's poke. He has a really good trading patterns into GP, and because of his passive and Darn shield combined, he can just stay in lane forever, and he forces GP to get out of mana and not be able to do much. The issue with Set though is that you already picked Azir. You have these three champions that are okay with Set, but you don't really have targets to pick on with your ult against this team. I guess, you know, in some situations you'll be able to pick on the Rek'Sai. GP can be picked on sometimes, not a lot of times when you have something like Tahm Kench, Aphelios, which makes it so GP can just stay back and hope that you come into him, which you will because of how Pantheon Zyrakan works. So Set doesn't make a lot of sense here. He's fine laning wise, but it doesn't. While it's okay with his own composition, it doesn't do a lot into the enemy composition. Then to seal the deal, Fnatic goes with the Veigar, and Veigar completely destroys his composition. It was already hard to play it against GP and Aphelios, and now it's just literally impossible. Veigar completely destroys every champion. Pantheon cannot engage without a good follow-up. Xayah has really low range, she can't really get into Veigar's face. The cage completely destroys it. Rakan has really hard time engaging. The Azir versus Veigar matchup in itself is really bad. Azir can mostly go even in laning phase, yes, but he loses in team fights. He can't really approach. He has a really hard time playing around the cage. Then sets the obvious one. He literally can't walk up unless the cage is on cooldown. So it's really hard for Misfits to play their game just from draft alone. This all happened because Misfits decided to go into early pick Pantheon and then commit themselves to Zyrakan super early on before knowing uh, knowing that Fnatic had already GP Aphelios, which is a good combination to play front to back. So it's really weird draft from Misfits. I think they had a plan, but Fnatic answered it really early on, and then they didn't try something else. They just they kept going for the same thing, which ends up costing them the game.